So I'm pleased to moderate this session. This is curated and produced by our underwriter, Booz Allen Hamilton, and I'll introduce our next speakers and have them give us brief introductions about themselves. To my left is Kevin Coggins, who's the Program Manager for Positioning, Navigation, and Timing at U.S. Army. And to his left is Tom Pfeiffer, who's the Senior Vice President and Lead of Positioning, Navigation, and Timing for Defense and Intelligence at Booz Allen Hamilton. So Kevin, why don't you give us a little bit of background on yourself? Oh, one other message. On your materials, we had Harold Stormy Martin participating in this as well. He unfortunately had an emergency today, then could not join us, so we wish him the best, but I just wanted to make that programming note to you all as well. Kevin, thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about your role and your background.
Oh, thank you. My name is Kevin Coggins. I am the Army's Program Manager for Positioning, Navigation, and Timing. I've been with the Army just over 5 years. I'm from industry. And that has a lot to do with my approach to P&T and acquisition in the Army, and we're going to talk about that. So P&T, you may not realize, and in the Army in general, we're the largest user of space by volume. We have more GPS receivers and communication radios than any other service in the Department of Defense. So it's very, very important to us that space is a secure, reliant capability that we can use as we fight. I happen to be the program manager for positioning, navigation, and timing, and when you think P&T, you think GPS, right? Well, P&T is much, much more than GPS. If it's just GPS, and GPS is not working, then we don't have P&T, and that's something we can't accept. So we've got 3 things I want to briefly tell you about our priorities and what we're doing in P&T. Our first priority is obviously the soldier today. We have equipment fielded with hundreds of thousands of GPS receivers so that we can shoot, move, and communicate. If that equipment doesn't work, then we're slower and we're not as good as we need to be. So one of the main things we do is we make sure the soldier has what they need. We're adapting their training. We're upgrading equipment with software updates and hardware updates in the field today to maintain our capability. The second thing that's very important to us is innovation. I was very pleased with this first panel talking about all the innovative ways they're leveraging the commercial industry and new space capabilities. In the Army, we're looking to do the same thing. Industry is developing phones that are much smaller than our radios and our GPS receivers. Their phones are leveraging inertial sensors and really good clocks and other technologies that we're drawing into the military now. Obviously, they need to keep their equipment working so their customers are happy. We're in the same boat. Our customers are the warfighter and the taxpayer. We've got to meet commitments to both. And so we're innovating across the board. There are some brilliant things happening in space, companies like Iridium that have whole Earth coverage. What can we tap into in Iridium to help positioning, navigation, and timing? There are companies like Google that recently had some very, very interesting results with inertial sensors in their phone. Much better than some of the things we've seen in science and technology. So now how can we leverage what Google is doing? Self-driving cars. They need to know where they're at and where they're at relative to each other. So do I in the Army. So we're going to leverage that technology. There is a lot of innovation that we're able to take advantage of. The third thing is collaboration. We don't fight by ourselves. We fight with many other services and capabilities across the department. And we need to make sure we collaborate with them so that their capabilities are also improving. The way they architect, the way that we can help each other with the data we have to improve their positioning, navigation, and timing as well as ours. Many times we have Army forces out there, and there might be the Navy or the Air Force supporting them with fires or information. If we can't communicate to them because our P&T is down, we can't have that collaboration, so we have to secure it as well.
That's great. Tom, you want to give us a little bit about your background and some of the issues that you're tracking as well?
Sure. Okay. My name is Tom Pfeiffer. I've been with Booz Allen a long time. Booz Allen's evolved over the years I've been with them. I started in Booz Allen in 1984, and it was a small company doing a lot of mostly commercial work, a little bit of work with the Navy, the DoD, and that's where I started doing Navy HF SATCOM work. I didn't know I'd still be around and doing different things. And so over the course of my years, I'm now Senior Vice President there, and I'm responsible most recently for position, navigation, timing, and not just PNT, but rather Brazilian PNT. When I look at our clients that we have, and as we've evolved over the years from 1984 to now, we've grown from 2,000 folks to 23,000 folks. And we have clients across the market, across the globe. It's all the services, all the intel communities, the civil and commercial. Up till just recently, I was the Air Force lead for C4SR, and through that we have a number of folks supporting GPS-3 primarily, and the modernization and protection of that capability. It's a vital asset. And just recently I started looking back and saying, well, who relies on that? And really people don't know, most people don't actually realize, after 25 years, this exquisite, global, free utility has just been exploded into the use of these applications you mentioned earlier. To the point where it's interesting. We were at a conference, probably both of us at JNC,
right.
And someone asked the question, where does GPS come from? And they're like, Verizon? No. NASA? No. Air Force? Really? They just don't know. That's good and that's bad. The good news is that since it's a free utility and an exquisite utility, and the devices have gotten very small and capable, all of a sudden the applications have exploded. And so to the point where people actually use this exclusively. With the FCC, it's mandated as part of timing for communications. And in the Department of Homeland Security, of the 16 critical infrastructures they track, 14 at least rely on some form of PNT. And so, and of course the DoD Intel community rely on it tremendously. So within Booz Allen, my role is to help come up with a resilient PNT capabilities, one way or another, for our disparate clients across the board. So I get to come up from the Air Force and move across using the expertise of a very talented team. And I'll talk a little bit about some challenges, things we're seeing, but that's what I'm kind of excited about, because there really is a lot to work with, but you got to be creative. And I love a line from Apollo 13 where they're trying to get things back, and Gene Kranz comes in the room and says, he throws a box of capability, things, tools, piece parts, and says, figure it out, and failure is not an option. I feel like that's the same way with us. We need for you assured PNT one way or another, and you and I have talked a couple of times about different ways to derive that. And some of it easier than others, but you need to have it, and so that's what I'm focusing on within Booz Allen.
And our goal here is to reference every space movie that's ever been made today, so we're right down the list. We're doing well. Kevin, what's the Army doing to protect our ability to provide PNT service to the warfighters?
That's a good question. So we're actually doing a lot. One of the first things we're doing is one of the things I talked about. We're focusing on the soldier. We've got equipment out there today that is heavily reliant on PNT. We make sure soldiers have the basics of what do they do when PNT is not working, when GPS is not working. That's part of protecting our ability to fight. Sometimes they have to use a map and compass, but most of the time they have to innovate. They have to have training, tactics, and procedures to deal in the case where they have these outages or it's not quite what they need it to be. However, that's what we can do today, but what are we doing in the short term and the long term that's really innovating to solve the problem? We're expanding beyond GPS. We're going to have an architecture that is not only resilient but flexible. One of the challenges in defense acquisition is we spend many years developing a capability, test the capability, then we field and use it. And when we want to go in and make a change to it, it's expensive. And we may not be able to change as fast as we need to change based on the threat. And so why not have an architecture going in that can change like that? That can change on the fly. That when somebody at Stanford comes up with a new technology, they just need to know, how do I plug it in? I don't have to buy or equip or test a great big system. Now I can be flexible. So GPS as a core, you put in good inertial sensors, chip seal atomic clock, many of the smart technologies that can give us resilience and redundancy and trust and integrity of the information. But you also have this innovative space where somebody can plug something in and you can become better. Maybe it's less expensive, but at least I don't need a brand new acquisition or have to go through a large bureaucracy to make a very important change. So I would call that flexibility. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to be flexible in where we get PNT and in being able to be upgradable as we go forward.
Yeah, I recently read about the Naval Academy going back to teaching manual navigation techniques, right? They've skipped almost a generation of seamen who don't have those skills necessarily. So Tom, what is industry doing to mitigate the threats to the GPS signal?
You know, it's interesting. This is one aspect where industry and the DoD are really, it's leapfrogging each other, building upon each other. You think about the smartphone. The smartphone came along and all of a sudden created a lot of capabilities, and it changed the way things were acquired. All of a sudden, in Google, I mean, with Apple, it's 90 days to develop an app to get it out there. It operates within an environment that Apple defines, and that and does the security there, and that's the playground you get to play in, and you get to build an app very quickly. If it takes off, you make money. If it doesn't, whatever. You haven't spent a lot of time. We in the DoD tend to hold on to things for a long time because we invested a lot. If we had asked DoD to invent a smartphone, we'd still be waiting, and it'd be a long time. So we take it. So this is an area where the commercial world, you really got to keep an eye on it. And so, but they've done this because GPS exists, because the DoD created this capability. So what are they doing? You think about smart cars. How do smart cars work? Well, it's really a multi-int fusion capability device. Autonomous vehicle. They're using how do they know what's in front of them? Using radar, LiDAR, and oh, by the way, sonar. I'm a sailor. You think, why would you use sonar in the air? It's only good for about 25 feet in the air, but actually, under certain circumstances, it provides some capability. That's good to know, because that in different environments, that's again a clever way of using multi-int to create capabilities. What else they do? How do they know where they are? They're using LiDAR imagery to know to map the terrain. I think about PNT. All of a sudden, if you have all this very detailed imagery, you don't need to derive P. If you know you can only be in a certain place based on a landmark and something else and an elevation and a LiDAR image, you are where you are, that P. That P is critical for the inertial navigation systems that Kevin mentioned. These INS systems are what we use in aircraft and submarines and other ships forever to navigate, but they're big systems, accelerometers and gyroscopes. Now, they're little chips. And when you put a little chip, low power, size, weight, but they're made, in a little aircraft. It might be good once it loses GPS sync. It might be good to continue on that trajectory a minute, 2 minutes, a few minutes. They're doing clever things to find ways to refine that resolution. A lot of clever things that can be reused in the DoD market. Timing, another thing. GPS, exquisite timing, down to less than 100 nanoseconds. For reference, most of your comms is at the microsecond and a millisecond and microsecond level. It's an order of magnitude better. So how else can you get it? Well, these atomic clocks have come down. These the atomic chip scale atomic clocks. Again, little chip scale atomic clocks, exquisite timing, not as good, but under $1,000. This big. So that all of a sudden, that's a capability that the industry is creating because they see a need, and so we can take advantage of it. We don't need to acquire a chip scale clock. We don't need to acquire a lot of these IMUs, inertial navigation management units. We can use them, provide suggestions, provide environments where they can be reapplied, and look at how people are integrating the multi-infusion and things like that to use it. And one other thing I'd like to say is another thing that's really interesting about deriving PNT is so some of it's solved with science. Some of it's solved with engineering, some of it's solved with software, some of it's solved with data analytics. And through data analytics, I mean the Internet of Things. The first responders have a hard time finding people inside buildings. It's fine if you live on a single-family home on a block and someone's out there saying, here's where it is, hurry in here, he's inside the bedroom, he's having a heart attack, whatever it might be. But what if you're inside a skyscraper in an urban canyon, essentially? How does a first responder find you? It can't happen. It's very, very difficult right now. But inside all those traveling through those waves of what we call signals of opportunity, whether it's a cell phone tower or a Wi-Fi node or whatever it might be, and that little device you have with you is providing all sorts of information about where you might actually really be. Oh, by the way, another signal of opportunity, my Fitbit is probably recording right now my heart rate. My heart rate is here. You can find me. Someone could find out where I am based in this building and what my vital signs are. Hopefully they're doing well. But so we're excited. So commercial world really has is banking on this in a big way. And Kevin, I know you were just mentioned earlier that you were had some conversations with DIUX and how they're trying to integrate the best practices of industry into the defense, and I'm not as close to that as you perhaps are, but that's a way to bring together these really clever things that be done in the civil and commercial world into the DoD intel.
Last question here before we wrap up. Kevin, what are some of the biggest challenges to integrating these technologies, especially the protective technologies? If you have a new technology and you're implementing it, what are the barriers to that implementation right now?
That's a good question. So I'm going to give you two classes of barriers. One barrier is, how have we architected our current systems? In some of our systems, what we've done is we put 5 GPS receivers on one platform, maybe 14 GPS receivers. That means 14 antennas. But what it means in terms of protection and upgrade is, that's 14 different programs of record, 14 different boxes with 14 different PMs that have to be touched. And do you think that's going to be hard? It's going to be impossible. Some programs are near their end of life. Some programs are brand new and not open to change. And so for that holistic capability, I can't really protect it. So I've got to solve that architecture problem. I've got to get down to one good PNT device where I can focus that upgrade. The second is, what kind of protection does it need, right? So what is the threat? What is the vulnerability? With GPS, it's easy to talk about. It's, from the Army perspective, jamming and spoofing, right? Are they trying to block my access to the signal? Are they trying to send false signals that might fool my equipment? And so I have to have very smart systems that can detect when jamming and spoofing is occurring. Maybe I need situational awareness with sensors that I'm employing that tell me what's happening in the electromagnetic environment, what kind of threats are coming. Based on that information, I could feed it into an engine maybe it's an artificial intelligence engine that's taking in that data and other sensor data, trying to figure out what can I trust, what can I not trust. And so once I architect the way that I can take advantage of these solutions, that second challenge becomes getting the right solutions in there and against the threats that I'm going to face and the vulnerabilities that I might have.
That's great. Tom, any final comments on the challenges for these?
It's challenges and promises. I think we can solve all these problems. I really do. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of it's the acquisitions, the speed of acquisition, the ability to change, the ability to adopt. I think another challenge is standardization. I talked about the promise of Internet of Things, but really the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Group is saying this can be done, but if only we could standardize on a few of these devices, the interfaces and things like that. So I think that it's becoming less and less a technical challenge as much as it is it's a programmatic challenge, it's an acquisition challenge, it's a policy challenge, but it's solvable, and I think we need to solve it, because the more resilient, we heard from the other panel, the more, if our adversaries, if they don't have a kill shot, if they take away the GPS and we have a day without space or something like that, it was devastating to understand how many things are linked to that. But if it's like, well, you know what, we're not as good as we used to be, but guess what? We can operate in this capacity at 90%. That's a resiliency level. And in another capacity, it's 80%. But it's not zero. That's the important thing. And so I think that, and it gets back to even, going back to even the celestial navigation. That does work. And it's not to the highest resolution, but it works. I'm a sailor. I sailed my boat to Ireland last summer, and I don't need to be within a centimeter. 10 miles, good.
Yeah. Ireland's a big country. As long as you hit it, you're fine.
Right.
But so the old school is good, and people used to have a lot of ways of deriving time, other ways of deriving position, and then navigation. I think we can get back to some of that basic stuff, reinvent it, we'll be fine. But we got to do that.
That's a great place to wrap. So thank you all again for joining us this morning. I know that Tom's going to hang around for a little bit if you want to chat with him after this. I'm sure Kevin, you can grab him before he leaves as well. But I appreciate everybody participating, and I just want to thank Kevin and Tom for your support for this event today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.